Apex Legends has a lot of interesting movement mechanics that still seem to be quite unknown and might appear very alien to those not familiar with how they work. I'm not gonna claim that I discovered the movement techniques in this video first, as it's impossible for me to know this, but for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna name them for referencing in the video. I'm gonna divide the video into a few segments, which are controls, basics, and advanced. Starting off with controls, and you might ask why? Well, because of some limitations imposed design-wise by the developers. So let's get into the first one, which is the jump. You want to bind this to either a mouse wheel up or down. The reasoning behind this is mainly bunnyhopping, which we're gonna go more in depth on later, but essentially it'll be mainly used for spamming jump inputs in rapid succession. Next up is ADS hold, and I want to say that this is only for those of us who use toggle for aiming down sights. But you want to bind ADS hold to mouse wheel up or down. Doing this will only hold ADS for one update per scroll input, meaning you don't actually enter ADS. Now there are two reasons why this is useful. First is because if you're reloading and you press right click, it'll buffer ADS for as soon as the reload animation is finished, with no way to cancel it, which could mess with you if you're trying to sprint away, but hitting ADS hold will get you out of this buffer, allowing you to keep sprinting after reload without it entering ADS against your will. Now the second use for this is to get out of sprint without having to enter ADS. Hitting your sprint cue will make you keep sprinting until you let go of W, or rather, this is how it should work. Sprinting in Apex is a bit wonky. For some reason, even after letting go of W, for a little while, if you press W again, without pressing sprint, you will still enter a sprint. Now this is problematic, because sprinting makes considerably more noise than normal walking, which could alert your enemies if you're role-playing Solid Snake. But it also introduces a delay when trying to fire from the sprinting state. So when you're in a possible shooting scenario, it is often a good idea to enter normal walking. And the final one we're going to talk about is toggle crouch, which you can bind to any key. I'm fairly sure most players skip out on toggle crouch, since it's fairly uncommon to use in shooters, and also because it doesn't work too well with sliding plus jumping. However, when attempting to respawn a teammate, you are not allowed to crouch when using the hold input. Though, toggle crouch still allows you to crouch during this, although it's a bit buggy because sometimes it will eat your inputs. Anyway, this is useful for hiding more of your body, but also for using repeatedly to decrease the chance of a random faraway craver one-shotting you. Basics. Now let's move on and break down the normal movement mechanics for basic essential knowledge. By adding this console command to your game's launch options, which is within the Origin client, you'll get text in your upper left showing your velocity. This will help you understand upcoming parts of this video easier and just Apex movement overall. Now first, let's break down the basics of sprinting. Starting a sprint will slowly increase your velocity until you reach your equipped weapon's cap, and most weapons accelerate until they reach 260 units, while fists let you get all the way up to 299. You can even change the direction of your sprint very fast without losing velocity. However, if you want to change your sprint to go at an angle using H/D keyboard inputs, not rotating with your mouse, it'll drop your speed down to roughly 240 before slowly climbing up again. So in fights, or if you just generally want to stay as fast as possible, it's better to run without changing your angle, and again I'm only talking about the A/D keyboard inputs, not your mouse. Without sprinting, most weapons are capped at a velocity of 173 without ADS, and it's very varied between weapons while you're using ADS. Some weapons like Wingman, however, are still 173 velocity even when you're using ADS. Fists, though, have their cap at 199 always. Now let's move on to sliding. In order to initiate a slide, you need to be above 200 velocity. Sliding will also give you a short speed boost of 120 velocity more or less that rounds out pretty fast. The speed boost, however, gets slower and slower if used repeatedly, and while not sliding, it'll gradually increase until full power again. However, the velocity display also takes verticality into the mix, and interestingly enough, so does the velocity required for sliding. So if you're in a fight, for example, you can in a lot of cases jump in order to get a directional slide going without having to stop aiming. Now, jumping in itself is pretty straightforward. You can, however, crouch while in the air to reach higher up. There is also a stamina-esque system in play, related to jumping only, so quickly jumping after landing will result in a lower height if you jump. Now, another thing worth noting is that you can jump very late after running off objects in this game. You go down quite a bit vertically while doing this, and this, funnily enough, triggers the stamina system, and as such, your jump height is decreased. Next up is the climbing/vaulting mechanic. I think a lot of players who first try the game will assume that, like a lot of other games, the way you vault or climb is press space next to an object. But the way it works in Apex is that you simply must fulfill two conditions. One, you need to be airborne, and two, you need to hold down W. Now this applies for both the climbing mechanic and the vaulting mechanic. These two mechanics may first look like it's part of the same motion, but they're two separate things, and as such we'll use terminology to easily separate them. Climbing is when you're on a tall wall, simply just climbing to get higher. However, whenever you eventually face a ledge, you'll start to climb on top of that. This is the same mechanic no matter how low the ledge is placed, so we'll simply refer to this whole ordeal as vaulting. There's also a state where if you're in the process of vaulting on a high up ledge, that if you just let go of your inputs, your character will simply hang there. This is actually its own separate action that carries different mechanics, and it's not a part of vaulting. It's not really useful for anything we'll go over in this video though, so I won't be giving it any specific terminology. Now, another thing that might be fun knowing is that when you're grabbing a rope, your velocity is cancelled out, as you start getting pulled up by it. However, if you let go of the rope, it'll give you a speed boost in the direction you're looking. You can also use this for a small speed boost as well, as completely changing directions when running near ropes. It is more of a fun thing to do rather than it is useful. Advanced. With these basics covered, I think we're ready to dive into the more advanced and interesting mechanics of Apex. The first technique we're going to talk about is melee landing interrupt. When you're dropping from a high enough distance, as you land, you'll get put into a superhero landing.
You're gonna do a superhero landing. Wait for it! Woo! Superhero landing!
Unable to move and accurately aim for a bit. You can get out of this lag using a melee attack mid-air, the kick. I don't exactly know why this works, but the timing for it has to do with the animation moving your character. On the X and Y 3D axes, your animation will move your character at a certain point in a kick. For some reason, when this occurs, it'll get you out of the laggy landing state. So, for maximum consistency in reducing your landing lag, you want to try and input your kick later rather than earlier. The time you save from trying to do it as early as possible is very minimal. Now, there is also a way to avoid landing lag completely, which is to initiate a climb next to a wall before you land, or vaulting. But this is a lot more situational and depends on where you are at the map. Ledgejump. At any point in a vault sequence, you can press your jump key and you will jump backwards. However, if you hold your backwards key before pressing jump, your character will simply jump straight up instead. This will allow you to basically skip the vaulting sequence and get up instantly. A this point, you're probably thinking you should always use this for every scenario since it should be faster, right? Wrong. Vault Speedboost. After performing a vault, if the sprint input is buffered, you will immediately be at your equipped weapon's max velocity, allowing you to, for example, do an instant full speed slide. You can also turn your view to a variety of angles before finishing the vault to get your speed boost in that direction. Benefit from doing this instead of the ledge jump is that there's obviously the fact that you're at max speed as soon as you get up, but also with a ledge jump you might get too high up and need to wait a bit before you can land and start moving again. Another benefit of ledge jump though is that you can climb on top of things while still shooting behind you. So there is not an absolute option you should go for, and oddly enough makes these two options relatively balanced to each other, with both having pros and cons. However, by doing the ledge jump very early, you can perform a tiny vault on a lot of ledges, giving you the benefits of both worlds, although it technically slows you down actually getting up by a tiny amount. This can be very tricky to do though, especially during adrenaline pumping moments, so I would not recommend this as a consistent option. Now let's also mention what makes this technique extra interesting is that there is a frame perfect hidden trick to this. If you press jump and crouch at the same time as soon as you get up, you will do a slide jump with an insane velocity. Now that timing, however, might be one of the trickier things to get consistent at in the game. The next thing we're gonna get into is probably the most interesting and defining move of Apex, something which really sets the game apart from other Source titles I've played before. Momentum shifting. This is gonna be very simple, yet it carries a lot of practical use. How you perform it is by being airborne and having momentum in a direction. Then inputting any direction, depending on your velocity, it'll be able to shift which direction you're moving. For example, at a really high velocity, such as Octane's jump pad, you'll be more limited, but at the most regular speeds, you'll be able to do shifts in 90 degrees. Now this brings a lot of interesting possibilities which I will show further in the video after we look at some more mechanics. Bunnyhopping. Probably the most famous technique in Apex right now because of the maneuverability you get while using health-related items. To put simply, by jumping just as you land, the friction of landing on the ground won't take away much or any of your velocity. Now this technique is why I at the start of the video proposed that you should bind one of your mouse wheel scrolling directions to jump, which is simply for spamming. In other Source-based games, where bunnyhopping is a thing, such as Counter-Strike Source, you would use the mouse wheel for precision on the first jump, and then let the rest of the scroll cover up in case you miss the sweet spot. But, much like the infamous patch for Counter-Strike Source in 2010, even if you score a perfect bunnyhop in Apex, you don't get that much mileage from it, as there is now a cap each time you hit the ground, which is 300 velocity. Basically, this means that every time you land, even with a perfect bunnyhop, if you are above 300 velocity, it will start to decrease it. It's not going to take away all your velocity in an instant, but it will take a hefty amount. So, for example, when you're landing from the dropship or a balloon, by instantly bunnyhopping, you can keep a massive amount of velocity for a few hops, but it'll eventually get reduced to below 300 even if you frame perfect. Airstrafing. If you're familiar with other Quake/Source-based titles and bunnyhopping, you're probably aware of airstrafing. While you're midair, by inputting movement towards a 90 or negative 90 degrees angle of where your velocity is directed, you'll be able to slowly redirect your velocity's direction using mouse movement, while actually increasing your velocity. In other Source titles, you could set how fast you're allowed to turn on the server side of things, but as you might suspect, no such option will be available for us in Apex. And the value the developer set this at does not allow for very fast turn speeds. But where this gets interesting is that you can combine this technique with momentum shifting for sharper turns where needed, giving a truly deep and unique experience that truly sets this game apart from other titles incorporating airstrafing. At this point, however, you might realize that the way you input these two techniques is the same, which naturally makes them work against each other. For example, if you came from a Counter-Strike title, you probably experienced that when you first tried airstrafing, here your speed gets cancelled out. The reason for this is because in Counter-Strike titles, you want to hold A/D before you start moving your mouse for maximum synchronization. In Apex, however, this would result in you performing momentum shifts, and as a result, your airstrafing endeavors are not directed correctly. So how do you properly airstrafe in Apex? The answer is odd, but the technique itself is pretty easy to do once you get used to it. By holding a movement direction, you cannot momentum shift. So if you're holding A in order to strafe left, press D before letting go of A, then let go of A and start moving your mouse to the right. The result is an airstrafe just like how it was in Counter-Strike. I don't really know why this works, but it does, and is actually a brilliant way to handle this. So then you might ask, but what about when I first jump? I will simply press A/D while you're still holding down W, then once A/D is pressed, you let go of W. Or alternatively, you could just turn your camera so your A/D input is towards the jump's forward direction, and then you can just proceed to strafe normally. Walljumping. By jumping straight or at a slight angle towards the wall, let go of all your inputs and you will see that you get stuck to the wall for a bit, as if you tried to hang on or something like that. We will refer to this as a wall slam. This will allow for an interesting mechanic, the wall jump. Interestingly enough, there are various ways you can control what wall jump you get from this state. Now the first one is a slightly down-angled wall jump, which will occur when your vertical velocity is directed upwards. The second one is directed slightly upwards, allowing you to go further. This one, however, requires that you have vertical velocity downwards. In order to get as much speed and height on these wall jumps, it is better if you jump as early as possible after entering the wall slam state. Once again, you can use your scroll wheel for this as you're about to hit the wall. This means if you want the wall jump angled slightly upwards, you want to be falling downwards a bit as you hit the wall. But there is also a third wall jump, and probably the most useful out of the three. This one is completely vertical. Now for this one, it doesn't matter if your vertical velocity is directed up or down. All that matters is that after you've entered the wall slam, press W and jump while holding it. The tighter you can string these two inputs together, the higher you go. This is because your wall slam will transition into a climb if you hold W, so the longer you're in the climbing state, the more speed you lose. It is important to note though that while the vertical wall jump is faster than climbing, it does not reach as high. Wallride. Now this is a very interesting technique where you jump on a wall sideways, and while holding A or D for moving into the wall, turn your mouse similarly to an airstrafe. The result is that you enter a wall slam but with steadily accelerating movement sideways. You can pick up a lot of velocity this way, and you can link other moves into this, such as a slide, to get even more speed. And since you're in the wall slam state while doing this, you can always transition into any of the wall jumps.